Under the relentless Montana sun, over 600 U.S. 7th Cavalry soldiers rode into a valley, anticipating a swift end to their campaign. They were catastrophically wrong. Among them, a German immigrant, Charles Windolph, was about to step into a living hell, a battle so brutal it would be seared into the annals of frontier warfare. He lived to tell the tale, but would his account change everything we thought we knew about Custer's last stand? On the sun-scorched morning of the 25th of June, 1876, the 600 troopers of the 7th Cavalry Regiment pushed westward, kicking up dust across the rugged Montana terrain that lay between the Rosebud River and the Little Bighorn. Private Charles Windolph, a German immigrant serving in Company H, rode with his comrades, the column stretching long, each company maintaining a four-abreast formation with 50 to 60 feet separating them. The air was already hot, hinting at the arduous day ahead. A halt was called by Adjutant Lieutenant Cook. Orders soon followed. Captain Frederick Benteen was to take his own Company H, which included Private Windolph, along with Captain Thomas Weir's Company D and Lieutenant Edward Godfrey's Company K, and scout the forbidding bluffs to their south. Their mission was clear: sweep the high ground and engage any Lakota or Cheyenne warriors they might find. This detachment numbered approximately 125 men. For Windolph and the others in Company H, this meant veering away from the main trail Custer and the bulk of the regiment would follow. General George Armstrong Custer kept 5 companies I, F, C, and L under his direct command. Major Marcus Reno took charge of companies M, A, and G, supported by most of the Arikara, Ree, and Crow scouts, led by Lieutenant Charles Varnum and the experienced civilian scout Charlie Reynolds, also known as Lonesome Charlie Hare. With this division, the regiment was now split into 3 distinct elements, each tasked with navigating the treacherous landscape independently. Word had been circulating of a large Native American village somewhere to the west, perhaps 12 to 15 miles distant. No one knew its exact size. The native scouts accompanying the regiment seemed uneasy, their estimates speaking of thousands of inhabitants. Custer and his senior officers, however, appeared to anticipate a force of perhaps 1,000 to 1,500 warriors, whom they believed to be indifferently armed and likely to scatter if met with a vigorous cavalry charge. To a private like Windolph, these were matters for the officers. His duty was to ride and fight if ordered. The initial strategy had been to locate the village and launch an attack at dawn on the 26th of June, hoping to strike while the inhabitants were asleep. This plan was abruptly discarded. Reports came in that the regiment's presence had been detected by enemy scouts. The element of surprise was gone. General Custer, known for his aggressive tactics, made the decision to attack immediately. The 7th Cavalry would go into battle without waiting for Generals Terry or Gibbon and their supporting columns. For Windolph and every other trooper, the time for marching was ending and the time for fighting was rapidly approaching. Captain Benteen led his battalion, companies H, D, and K, into the rugged Badlands to the south. For Private Windolph and the men of Company H, this meant urging their mounts over steep inclines, through rocky defiles, and across deep, shadowy coulees. The terrain was unforgiving. At the crest of each successive ridge they surmounted, Benteen's adjutant, Lieutenant Francis Gibson, would scan the broken country ahead, then signal back with a sweep of his arm, "No Indians." The low current of discontent began to murmur through the ranks as the hot hours wore on. Windolph and his fellow troopers, caked in dust and sweat, likely shared the sentiment. Were they on a wild goose chase while the main column under Custer engaged the enemy? After nearly 2 hours of this arduous and seemingly fruitless reconnaissance, having covered an estimated 10 to 12 miles of punishing ground, Benteen gave the order to turn north. The objective now was to intersect Custer's trail. A sense of relief likely passed through Windolph and his comrades as they finally descended from the broken bluffs into a somewhat flatter, though still small valley. They pushed westward, following a small winding creek bed. Their progress was soon hampered. The regimental pack train, burdened with essential ammunition reserves and supplies, had become bogged down in a swampy patch of ground near the stream. The sight of the struggling mules, their packs askew, underscored a vulnerability. The regiment needed to move swiftly, yet its lifeline of supplies was proving slow and cumbersome. As troopers, including men from Company H, dismounted to help heave the stubborn mules from the sucking mud, faint, distinct popping sounds drifted on the wind from the north and west. Gunfire, distant but unmistakable. Captain Weir, known for his impetuous nature, urged his Company D forward at a quicker pace. Captain Benteen, his face set, rode at the head of the now hastening column. Every man, including Windolph, felt a surge of adrenaline. The battle had clearly been joined. Having finally cleared the bog, Benteen's battalion passed a lone tipi. It was engulfed in flames, black smoke coiling into the clear sky, likely torched by Custer's advance scouts. The horses, already on edge, became more skittish, their ears pricked, nostrils flaring at the scent of smoke and the unsettling sounds of distant combat. Suddenly, a lone rider burst into view, his horse lathered, galloping hard from the direction of the fighting. It was Sergeant Daniel Canipe from Company C. He reined in sharply, shouting to Captain McDougal, whose Company B was escorting the pack train, to bring the ammunition forward quickly. "We're killing them," Canipe exclaimed, his face alive with the initial rush of combat. Benteen, observing coolly, gestured for Canipe to return to his unit by the way he had come. Moments later, another figure appeared, this one on foot, stumbling slightly. It was trumpeter John Martin, Giovanni Martini, an Italian immigrant who had once served with Garibaldi. He was now a member of Windolph's own Company H. Martin's sleeve was stained with blood, though it appeared to be from his horse, which had been shot through the hip and was bleeding profusely. The trumpeter himself, though clearly shaken, carried himself with a soldier's bearing. He held out a folded dispatch from Lieutenant Cook, Custer's adjutant. "Benteen, come on, big village, be quick, bring packs, W.W. Cook, P.S., bring packs." For Windolph and the men of H Company, seeing one of their own carry such an urgent message underscored the gravity of the situation unfolding just miles away. Benteen read the note then, perhaps deeming Canipe's earlier verbal report sufficient, instructed Martini to rejoin the company. The sounds of gunfire were now much louder, a continuous rolling barrage. Then, a party of Crow or Arikara scouts appeared, leading captured enemy ponies. They pointed urgently towards the bluffs to the north, their voices sharp with excitement and alarm. "Soldiers!" They were closing rapidly on the Little Bighorn Valley, and a fierce battle was clearly raging. Benteen's voice cut through the rising tension. "Draw pistols," he commanded. "To the bluffs, gallop! Be ready for anything." Private Windolph, along with every other trooper in the battalion, drew his Colt .45, the metallic click of hammers echoing down the line, and spurred his horse into a run towards the high ground, towards the sound of the guns. As Captain Benteen's battalion, with Private Charles Windolph and Company H among them, galloped towards the sound of the guns, they crested the first line of bluffs. The sight that met Windolph's eyes was a scene of sprawling chaos. Some 150 feet below and stretching half a mile into the distance, the valley of the Little Bighorn was a maelstrom of activity. Cavalrymen, blue specks against the dun-colored earth, were riding in various directions, some seemingly disorganized, while the continuous heavy volleys of gunfire rolled up the slopes like thunder. Further downriver, Windolph could discern massive dark clusters of mounted warriors, a formidable display of native strength dominating the horizon. Events were unfolding with breathtaking speed, making it difficult for any soldier, including Windolph, to immediately grasp the full tactical picture. Then, through the dust and smoke, Benteen's men, Windolph among them, spotted a group of soldiers on a hill to their north. Some were mounted, many others were on foot, clearly in a defensive posture. With a shared sense of urgency, their hearts likely pounding in unison with the drumming of hooves, Windolph and his comrades in Benteen's command spurred their tired horses towards these beleaguered troopers. To understand the desperate situation Benteen's battalion was riding into, it's essential to recount Major Marcus Reno's earlier engagement that afternoon. Around 12:15 p.m., as the 7th Cavalry neared the Little Bighorn, General Custer had divided his command. Major Reno was assigned companies A, G, and M, approximately 140 troopers and officers, along with about 30 Arikara and Crow scouts and a few white scouts like Fred Gerard and Charlie Reynolds. Custer himself retained 5 companies, CEFINL, around 210 men. Captain Benteen, with companies D, H, Windolph's company, and K, totaling about 125 men, was already scouting the rugged terrain far to the south and west. Captain McDougall's company B, escorting the pack train, trailed behind the main elements. Reno's battalion and Custer's 5 companies initially moved in parallel down a dry creek bed towards the Little Bighorn, sometimes only 50 yards apart, other times separated by 200 yards. Around 2 p.m., near a smoldering tipi containing the body of a warrior slain in an earlier fight with General Crook's command, Custer received word from Scout Fred Gerard that warriors were close by. Custer then ordered Reno through Adjutant Lieutenant Cook. The Indians are about 2 miles below, on the left bank of the river, and in strong force. The general directs that you take as rapid a gait as you think prudent and charge the village, and you will be supported by the whole outfit. That promise of support would later become a point of bitter contention and endless debate. With those orders, Reno's roughly 140 men and their attached scouts pushed across the Little Bighorn, pausing briefly for their horses to drink before reforming on the west bank. Before them lay a wide, flat valley stretching towards a distant plateau. Along this valley for nearly 3 miles lay the immense native encampment, circles of Sioux, Hunkpapa, Oglala, Sanzark, Miniconjou, Blackfoot Sioux, Cheyenne, and some Arapaho. Rumors, which now seem terrifyingly plausible, suggested up to 10,000 people with an estimated 2,000 to 3,000 warriors. It's crucial to dispel the myth of every warrior being armed with a Winchester repeater. Perhaps half carried traditional bows, lances, or war clubs. Of those with firearms, many had older muzzle loaders or single-shot rifles. Only an estimated 25 to 30% likely possessed modern repeating rifles. Young boys 14 years and older also joined the defense of their homes. U.S. troopers, like Windolph, carried the single-shot 45 to 70 Springfield carbine and the 6-shot Colt .45 revolver. Standard ammunition was 100 carbine rounds and 24 for the revolver. The practice of 1 man in 4 holding horses when dismounted created a vulnerability. If horses were lost, so was crucial saddlebag ammunition. After fording the Little Bighorn, Major Reno advanced with his battalion in a column of 4s, scouts screening his left. As warriors streamed from the southern end of the village, Reno deployed his companies, M on the right, A in the center, G on the left, into a skirmish line across the valley. He ordered his men to dismount and fight on foot. They advanced about half a mile when a large force of mounted warriors attacked. For 10 minutes, Reno's men held, their Springfields cracking. Then hundreds more warriors, many with repeaters, threatened to overwhelm them. Reno ordered a remount and a withdrawal to timber along the river 300 yards back. The warriors pressed relentlessly. Reno again formed a dismounted skirmish line in the woods. After another 10 minutes of intense fighting, his command was nearly surrounded and taking heavy casualties. Bloody Knife, an Arikara scout standing near Reno, was shot in the head, splattering the major with blood and brains. Visibly shaken, Reno shouted an order to mount and retreat to the bluffs on the east side of the river. This retreat became a desperate, chaotic flight. Unit cohesion vanished. Troopers were shot from their saddles or pulled down as they raced nearly a mile across the open valley towards the river. Many were killed during this flight. Those who reached the river scrambled up the steep eastern bluffs, pursued closely. An estimated 15 to 20 men were lost in the valley or the river crossing. It was onto this scene of bloody disarray that Private Windolph and the men of Benteen's battalion arrived at approximately 2:30 p.m. As they reached the bluffs where Reno's survivors were gasping for breath, the sight was appalling. Reno's command was shattered, men wounded, dazed, their faces blackened by powder. The arrival of Benteen's companies D, H, Windolph's own, and K provided a desperately needed reinforcement. Captain Benteen, assessing the dire situation, immediately began shouting orders, his voice a galvanizing force amidst the chaos. He directed the men, including Windolph and his comrades from Company H, to deploy, take cover, and establish a defensive perimeter on what would later be called Reno Hill. Shortly after, Captain McDougall's Company B arrived with the pack train, bringing vital ammunition. Crouching behind hastily constructed breastworks of saddles and hardtack boxes, Windolph and the other survivors prepared for the renewed assault they knew must come. The sound of heavy, continuous firing from downstream to the north, indicating Custer was heavily engaged. While Private Charles Windolph and the other men of Reno and Benteen's combined command desperately fortified their position on Reno Hill, General Custer and his 5 companies rode north along the bluffs. His intention, it is presumed, was to flank the sprawling native village and strike it from the north. Near the northern edge of the encampments, in the area where the National Cemetery now stands, Custer's force collided with the main body of Lakota and Cheyenne warriors. For Windolph and the soldiers on Reno Hill, the first indication of this separate engagement was the sudden eruption of incredibly heavy gunfire from downstream. The sound was distinct, a continuous rolling thunder that spoke of a massive firefight, ominously different from the more sporadic firing they were now experiencing. The sheer number of warriors confronting Custer was overwhelming. Though no soldier with Custer survived to tell their tale, native accounts and archaeological evidence paint a picture of a desperate running fight. Custer's companies appear to have become isolated and were systematically cut down. For Windolph and his comrades, huddled behind their makeshift defenses on Reno Hill, the distant volleys to the north were a source of grave concern. As dusk began to settle over the bloodied landscape, the sound of Custer's battle gradually diminished, eventually fading into an eerie, complete silence. A chilling realization must have spread among the survivors on the hill. Custer and his men were likely lost. Throughout the long, anxious night of the 25th of June, Windolph, alongside the other troopers, remained vigilant. They exchanged sporadic shots with warriors who crept close to probe their lines under the cover of darkness. Water was scarce, and the cries of the wounded added to the grim atmosphere. For Windolph, a German immigrant fighting in a strange and hostile land, it must have been a night of profound fear and uncertainty. At dawn on the 26th of June, the warriors renewed their attack on Reno Hill, but the assault seemed less coordinated, less intense than the previous day. Firing continued for several hours. Then, late in the morning, a remarkable sight, the vast native encampment began to break up. Lodges came down, travois were packed, and a great procession of people and ponies started moving south up the Little Bighorn Valley. The siege was over. The Lakota and Cheyenne were withdrawing, victorious. 2 days later, on the 27th of June, the exhausted and parched survivors on Reno Hill, including Windolph, witnessed the arrival of General Alfred Terry's relief column. Only then did the full scope of the disaster become known, with the discovery of Custer's command annihilated to a man on the ridges to the north. For Windolph and the other survivors, the relief of rescue was undoubtedly mingled with the horror of their comrades' fate. The Battle of the Little Bighorn was a brutal affair, its violence not limited to male combatants. Some accounts describe Cheyenne women taking up arms alongside the warriors. For the soldiers who survived, like Private Windolph, the battle left indelible scars, both physical and psychological. He and others from Company H, and indeed all the survivors from Reno Hill, had endured a terrifying ordeal. The news of the defeat sent shockwaves across America, leading to intensified military campaigns against the Plains tribes. The Sioux ultimately lost the sacred Black Hills, a betrayal of treaty promises that resonates to this day. The discovery of Custer's body, reportedly with arrows through his eardrums, perhaps a symbolic gesture by the warriors, added to the grim legend of the battle. For survivors like Windolph, such details, learned later, would have contributed to the complex memories of the engagement. The role of the Army's own Crow and Arikara scouts, some of whom fought against their traditional enemies, the Sioux and Cheyenne, highlighted the tangled allegiances of the frontier wars. Charles Windolph lived to share his story, becoming one of the last surviving troopers of the battle. His recollections and those of other survivors offer a ground-level perspective on the courage and chaos that defined the Great Sioux War of 1876. Archaeological discoveries years later, finding relics far from the main battle sites, suggest desperate flights and last stands, underscoring the brutal reality Windolph and his comrades faced. The event at Wounded Knee in 1890, where the 7th Cavalry killed around 300 Lakota, was seen by some as a tragic, brutal echo of Little Bighorn, a cycle of violence. The debate over Custer, the battle and its meaning continues. Was he a hero or a reckless fool. For the native warriors, it was a defense of their homeland against encroachment. For soldiers like Windolph, it was a desperate fight for survival ordered by their commanders. The land itself, especially the Black Hills, remains contested, a symbol of broken treaties and unresolved historical injustices. The Little Bighorn battlefield today attempts to honor all who fought there, but even its name and interpretation are subjects of ongoing discussion, reflecting the deep and often painful legacies of America's westward expansion. Windolph's survival allowed his personal account to become a part of this complex historical tapestry. Charles Windolph, an immigrant soldier in Company H, endured the crucible of Little Bighorn. He survived the chaos on Reno Hill, witnessing the desperate fight and the tragic aftermath. His story, one among many, provides a vital personal perspective on a battle that continues to shape America's understanding of its frontier past.